"Dad, you're done here." Those were the words that echoed through the glass boardroom of Reynard Tech, a billion-dollar software company in downtown Toronto, Canada. The CEO's chair spun around slowly, revealing Ethan Reynard, the founder's only son, his face smug, his suit flawless, his tone colder than the marble floor beneath him. Across the table sat Charles Reynard, the man who built the company from scratch with nothing but hard work and late nights. His gray hair shimmered under the ceiling lights, his trembling hands resting on the table. "Ethan, what are you saying?" Charles whispered, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I'm saying you're fired," Ethan said, tossing a white envelope across the table. "Effective immediately. You're no longer needed here. It's time for new leadership, mine." Gasps filled the room. The other executives, people who had worked with Charles for over 20 years, froze in shock. Charles stared at the letter, his heart pounding. "I founded this company with my bare hands, Ethan. You were in diapers when I was coding in that basement." Ethan smirked. "Exactly. And now it's my time. You're old-fashioned, Dad. Investors want innovation, not nostalgia. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Charles's eyes burned with both anger and heartbreak. "You'd really throw me out of my own company?" "Not your company anymore," Ethan said coldly. "It's mine now." Security guards entered the boardroom. Charles's lips quivered as one of them stepped forward, hesitant. "Sir." Mr. Ethan said, "We need to escort you out." For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind that makes your chest ache. Then, slowly, Charles stood up, straightened his jacket, and said softly, "You might have taken my chair, son, but you'll never understand what it took to build it." He walked out. The glass doors shut behind him with a final, echoing click. Cut to black. But how did it come to this? Months earlier. Charles Reynard was the kind of man people admired. He started Reynard Tech from his garage in Mississauga, with an old laptop and a dream. Over the years, he built it into one of Canada's top tech firms, known for its AI innovations, cybersecurity systems, and life-changing software that help thousands of businesses across North America. But after a lifetime of success, Charles was ready to slow down. He decided to bring his only son, Ethan, into the business. Ethan had studied finance at a top Ivy League school, and Charles believed it was time for him to take some responsibility. Unfortunately, Ethan wasn't like his father. He didn't believe in hard work or loyalty. He believed in shortcuts, appearances, and control. On his first day, he pulled into the company parking lot in a brand new Tesla, wearing designer sunglasses and a grin that screamed arrogance. Employees whispered as he walked through the halls like he owned the place. Within weeks, Ethan began changing things. He fired old employees who didn't fit the new image. He replaced them with flashy young hires who knew how to talk but not how to work. He cut budgets, ignored ethics, and treated long-time staff like disposable parts. Charles tried to reason with him. "Ethan, this company's reputation is built on trust. You can't just replace that with greed." Ethan scoffed. "Dad, you're stuck in the past. I'm not running a charity, I'm building an empire." Soon, complaints started pouring in. Product quality dropped. Morale fell. But Ethan didn't care. All he cared about was being seen as the youngest CEO in Toronto's tech scene. He was featured in business magazines, gave motivational speeches, and bragged about transforming his father's company. Charles watched in silence, heartbroken. The boy he raised with love and sacrifice was turning into a tyrant. One evening, after another argument in the boardroom, Charles confided in his old friend and CFO, Linda. "He's losing himself," Charles said quietly. "And I fear he'll destroy everything I built." Linda sighed. "He's blinded by power, Charles. If you don't act soon, he'll come for your position too." Charles shook his head. "He's my son, Linda. I can't believe he'd ever do that. But Linda looked at him sadly. Then you don't know him anymore. Days later, Ethan walked into his father's office with a team of lawyers and investors. He had convinced the board to vote Charles out, claiming his father was out of touch with the future. Charles's trust shattered as he realized the truth. Ethan had been planning it all along. That same afternoon, in the boardroom where it all began, Ethan executed his coup, firing his father from his own company in front of everyone. But what Ethan didn't know was that his victory would come with a cost so heavy, it would change his life forever. The day after Charles Reynard's firing, the Toronto skyline gleamed as if celebrating Ethan's so-called victory. Headlines splashed across business magazines. Young visionary takes over Reynard Tech. Toronto's boldest CEO, Ethan Reynard revolutionizes Canadian tech. But behind the smiles and flashing cameras, Ethan's empire was already beginning to rot from the inside. Within a month, chaos spread through Reynard Tech like wildfire. The company's new rebranding campaign, one Ethan spent millions on, failed miserably. Customers began complaining about software glitches, privacy issues, and sudden data losses. Major corporate clients pulled out, and investors started asking tough questions. But Ethan wouldn't listen. He strutted around the office, barking orders, obsessed with luxury instead of leadership. Buy more billboards. Sponsor influencers. We're not losing, we're evolving, he said arrogantly during a meeting. Linda, the CFO, spoke carefully. Ethan, we've lost 40% of our revenue this quarter. The AI security system failed 3 major clients. If this continues. Ethan slammed the table. I said we're fine. My father's outdated ethics slowed us down. I'm taking us global. He didn't realize the staff were starting to whisper behind his back. To them, Ethan wasn't a leader. He was a spoiled child playing with a billion-dollar toy. Meanwhile, Charles lived quietly in his modest suburban home in Oakville, far from the glittering skyline he once owned. He spent his mornings at a small local cafe, reading newspapers that sometimes carried stories about the company he founded, stories that made his chest ache. One morning, Linda came to visit. You were right, Charles, she said softly, sitting across from him. He's running the company into the ground. We're weeks away from bankruptcy. Charles looked down at his coffee. I can't interfere. It's his company now. He wanted control, now he has to learn what that means. Linda hesitated. He might destroy your legacy. Charles gave a small, tired smile. Sometimes, lessons are learned only through loss. 2 weeks later, disaster struck. A security breach hit Reynard Tech's most important client, a government agency. Sensitive data leaked online, and the media exploded with headlines. Reynard Tech under investigation for negligence. Stock prices plummet as CEO faces legal trouble. Panic filled the company. Ethan's investors withdrew millions overnight. The once glamorous office was now filled with angry voices, legal threats, and resignation letters. Ethan locked himself in his office, staring at the chaos outside his glass walls. His phone buzzed non-stop, journalists, lawyers, and panicked board members. For the first time, his arrogance began to crack. He remembered the words his father had said. You might have taken my chair, son, but you'll never understand what it took to build it. And now, he finally did. Late one evening, Ethan drove to his father's house. The rain poured heavily, soaking him as he stood at the doorstep. When Charles opened the door, Ethan looked smaller than ever, his pride washed away with the storm. Dad, he said softly, voice trembling. I messed up. Charles didn't say a word. He simply looked at the boy who had betrayed him, and saw not a CEO, but his lost son. Ethan continued, tears forming. I thought I knew everything. I wanted people to respect me, not just as your son, but as my own man. But I ruined everything you built. They're calling for my resignation, the company's collapsing. Charles sighed deeply. Respect isn't taken, Ethan. It's earned. Ethan fell to his knees. Please, help me fix this. For a long moment, Charles said nothing. Then, with a steady voice, he replied, I'll help, but not to save your pride. To save the people who still depend on that company. Ethan nodded, ashamed. The next morning, the board gathered for an emergency meeting. Charles entered the room quietly, alongside Ethan. The same executives who once watched the son fire the father were now watching the father return. Charles stood at the head of the table. Reynard Tech was never about greed or image. It was built on innovation, trust, and integrity. If you want me back, I'll return, but only under one condition: Ethan stays. He learns. He works. He earns it. The board agreed. For the first time in months, Ethan felt hope, mixed with deep guilt. He knew this wasn't redemption yet, but the beginning of it. Charles didn't smile. This is your second chance, son. Don't waste it. Months later, the company slowly began to recover. With Charles guiding the strategy and Ethan humbly rebuilding trust, investors returned, and clients regained confidence. But Charles didn't reclaim his old title. He told Ethan, you'll stay CEO. But this time, you'll lead with empathy, not ego. Ethan nodded. I will, Dad. I promise. As they stood side by side, watching the sunrise from the boardroom window, Ethan finally understood that true power wasn't in ownership, it was in honor. And for Charles, seeing his son learn that truth was worth more than any empire. Comment your city below and share what you'd do if your child betrayed you like this. Loudspeaker. Subscribe to Stories Mike for more relatable stories, poetic justice, and underdog comebacks from Canada and beyond.